Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Tech Community Live Windows Feedback Session. My name is Dave Randall, and I'll be the host for today's session. And I'm joined by three of my colleagues. I'll have them introduce themselves, and we'll start with Akash.
Hey everyone, my name is Akash Malhotra. I'm a PM here on the AutoPatch team. So any feedback you have regarding updates in general, feature updates, reporting, here to answer.
Thanks, Akash. Bev?
Hey, I'm Bev Ashton. I lead a customer engagement team for Windows Autopatch, and Copilot Plus PCs. Keen to hear your feedback on how we can help make things better.
Excellent. Thanks. And John?
Hi, I'm John Vinsel. I'm a product manager lead on Windows Autopatch, responsible for making patching and updating easy. Any kind of questions, feedback, we'd love to hear it.
And in addition to being your host, I'm also a product manager in the Intune engineering team. So if you've got feedback about Intune specifically, I'll make sure to get that back to the product group. So for today's session, it's a little bit different than some of the standard Ask Microsoft Anything sessions. Today, we're soliciting your feedback on managing Windows in your environment. We know that there's a lot of different challenges that you face day to day in managing Windows. And so we wanted to give you an opportunity to share some of those challenges that you have in managing Windows, patching Windows, deploying applications to Windows, and so forth, and give you an opportunity to share those challenges with us so that we can both have an opportunity to respond a little bit to those challenges, see whether or not we've got some information that might be able to help you out, as well keep that information so that we can take that back to the Windows team and help build products that better meet the challenges that you have in your environment. So today, let's see, we will start out with our first comment. And I noticed there were a couple of folks who posted comments early on Tech Community Live. Thanks for jumping in at the head of the line. So our first comment does come from Tech Community. Hi. One of the blockers or issues that we have is that there doesn't seem to be a centralized or documented place where it shows which settings are enabled by default. For example, device encryption in 24H2 for new Windows 11 builds. This would really help us inform about such changes and be able to test how they can affect our devices or users. So any thoughts about documentation and improving, or maybe there's some plans that we have on documentation and a centralized place for default settings? Anyone have some thoughts about that they could share with our audience?
This is definitely something that we've heard from a lot of customers. I think as we continue to see the pace of innovation change, trying to keep up with all of the things that are happening in all of the products is definitely a challenge that we continue to work on trying to improve. We've seen a lot of positive feedback recently with some of the blogs that we release with new releases to really focus on what's new rather than trying to cover everything that's within each build at once, because there is so much information out there. But I do appreciate when it comes to things like individual settings and policies and being able to get a quick read, that we could probably do a better job there. And I think it's something that we continue to look at. I don't know, just thinking to the other guys, the teams, in terms of advice and being able to look at, as you're doing your early testing or when you're in those sort of pre-release phases, just checking the configuration of your devices and estate, if there's any recommendation you'd make, because obviously customers have made their own changes as well. So it can be difficult for us to make sure that we're giving information that's relevant for everybody, depending on how else customers are managing their estate.
That's great. Thanks, Bev, for that. All right, next item that we've got, again from Tech Community, is a comment. Functionality that was once in Intune is being moved to or duplicated in other consoles like admin.microsoft.com, or, for example, Edge policy settings and organizational messages. Is there an intention to continue this practice in the future? In the case of Edge policy, is there a commitment to keep feature and policy settings parity between what's in admin.microsoft.com and the Intune settings catalog? It's a pain to have multiple consoles.
I can hop in on that one.
Okay.
So our goal is never to try to create multiple places to do things, but we do want to meet admins where they're at. And some folks aren't always in the Intune console, so we want to make sure it's easiest to offer settings and manageability where it's at. That being said, our goal, like in many of our products, is to try to create that single pane of glass and make it as easy to manage and update in one place as possible.
One of the other things from the Intune perspective is that we also want to make sure that we've got parity in those settings across any place, so that you don't have to go search in one area to find settings, search in another area to find different settings. So definitely point well taken on ensuring consistency, and thanks for your feedback on that too, John. All right, next item is some feedback on reporting. I know reporting is always a big topic with our customers. So question or statement is, it would be helpful if there were a Power BI app or template for reporting on Windows Update for Business updates or driver updates instead of having to use the Azure workbook.
I can take that. We actually, so we actually have a Power BI template that provides, basic updates on your drivers, quality updates, feature updates. So I can actually link the blog post that we did a couple of months ago or last year and how you can leverage that. But open to feedback on how folks, use Wolf reports for customizations and feedback pain points to have with the monitor workbooks as well. But I will definitely link that in the tech community post.
That's great. Thanks, Akash. I'm glad that's available and can help out our customers on the Power BI app. All right, next question came from Tech Community. Intune now has partner portals for Dell, HP, and Surface. Is there any plan to add this functionality for Lenovo?
Dave, as our resident Intune person, are you perhaps
there's a long awkward pause
question?
there, wasn't there? Okay, so sure, I'll take that question. Certainly there is an intention to build out the partner portals. I can't say whether or not Lenovo is specifically on that, but certainly we have plans to continue expanding the capabilities that are in partner portals. So keep your eyes peeled for the blog post of what's in development for Intune, and you'll see as we continue to make those new capabilities available, they'll show up there. Nothing that I can promise at the moment, though. All right, turning to another platform, we've got a question from one of our audience members on X. Why do you keep changing things? What are they called and where we use them? How can I plan? I think that's a great general question. It doesn't necessarily matter what the technology is, but maybe I think this might be a good opportunity for Akash, John, and Bev to each give your perspective on why do we keep changing things, and especially on naming conventions as well for your areas of ownership. So Akash, maybe to start with you for some quick thoughts.
Yeah, I think about most innovation. We're trying to simplify the update experience, and I feel like we heard the feedback and we noticed the opportunities. So we're trying to make it very simple. And I know there are a lot of name changes coming up, Autopatch, Intune, WolfBee. And so we heard the feedback with the opportunity, and we hope that going forward that, the simplified experience, we'll have one pane of glass for everything, and it'll be, easier to kind of understand the update experience into one management console. And so that's the plan. That's why we're doing, a lot of changing and simplifying. But we hope going forward that, won't be as confusing as it was.
All right. And John, why is change the only constant for you?
So I kind of echo what Akash says there. Like, a lot of the change that we do is to hopefully take in user feedback and just make products simpler. In some cases, it's also just evolving the products that we have, right? Using the same names and terminology over time as the concepts change doesn't always make a lot of sense. It sometimes becomes hard to find documentation, search, learn best practices, and things like that. So change for the sake of change isn't always good, but when it's meaningful and different enough, it actually does make a lot of sense. So we try to balance, what's kind of right for the user experience and what our admins want, but also as we kind of evolve the technology and it changes in principle or how it's used, we want to make sure it's also kind of more clear and concise on it.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks, John. How about you, Bev? What's your thought?
I think there are a few other factors that influence the fact that it's inevitable that we're going to keep making change. So a lot of the change that we drive really comes from the security landscape and making sure that we're putting users and admins in the best possible position to be able to stay protected and work in a secure way. We're also heavily influenced by what the rest of the industry is doing. So whether that's how users are changing over time, next generations of users and the ways they're used to interacting with apps and prompts and navigating things in a different way. You know, we all often laugh at how many kids don't understand why the save icon looks like a disk. There's some really simple things over time that happen that encourage us to continue to change. I know that's not as big as maybe brand names where we started talking about, and the fact that we do often hear feedback about, you know, can we stop renaming things? We do hear that, and we do try to do our best in that space. And I think it's a constant point of conversation. But some of those smaller changes and it kind of being iterative and constant, you know, we know we're not alone there. It's kind of the world that we live in these days and we've become more accustomed to. We do actually try to minimize it, but we also want to make sure that we are learning from the way that users are using their devices, taking feedback seriously from our admins to be able to make sure that we can improve the functionality, the manageability, and keeping new innovations coming. The pace of innovation has never been faster. It's one of the difficult things that we face into, and trying to introduce the best of the new opportunities and productivity tools so that people can benefit from them while also not overwhelming end users with change is a constant battle that we have. We do love customer feedback on this, whether it's through user voice or whether it's through speaking to account teams or joining in the tech forum, this tech community actually in the office hours that is run. It's amazing the feedback that we get through there and the conversation that it drives internally to help us. So I think anybody who has big thoughts about change that has worked well or change that they think is a good example of us not doing it well, one of the things that helps us the most is to hear that feedback. So to share it and let us know where it works and where it doesn't, so that we can make sure that we continue to improve in the way that we handle that.
I think that's I think that's really important for everybody to hear how valuable the feedback is. And up on screen, we've got the Windows Office Hours URL. So each month, another opportunity for you to provide feedback to the Windows team. And I guess there's one other part to that question, which was, how can I plan? Do any of you have thoughts about your favorite place where our customers can go to make sure that they're keeping up to date on the latest changes? I know we've got a lot, but go ahead.
I mean, my favorite one is the Windows IT Pro blog. We try to funnel everything we do through that, whether it's a monthly what's new or if there's other big announcements that come through. So for us, that's kind of like whether you're looking at Intune, you're looking at AutoPatch, you're doing Windows 11, any of those types of things. It's a general place for all Windows IT to kind of keep up to date on what's going on. And it's pretty cool there because you can kind of filter by product if you're just interested in a certain product landscape. So that's kind of my go-to spot.
I really love in that same spot, John, the blog that Thomas introduced recently, so that he's adding that news you can use section, which even though part of the engineering group and in part of those conversations, just having somebody that's got that communication mind to be able to simplify it down and give us those key statements and the links to all of the key pages, because like we talked about, there's a lot of information out there. It's really helpful having that quick summary to go to with all of those links that I know I can share with customers every time I interact with them, to encourage them to use that sort of as an index to help them find the information about all of the latest features.
Excellent. So we've got another comment from our tech community forum. From a business perspective, data loss is much more expensive than hardware replacement. So for businesses, things like TPM 2.0 requirements seem like a no-brainer. But the discussion around e-waste is still hard to ignore. How do we balance modern hardware over durability? For example, will Windows 11 devices today become obsolete with only support for Copilot Plus PCs?
I think that's probably my space, I guess, for me to pick up on that. I was just thinking about, there's a lot of small questions in there. So I'm just thinking about order in which to address them. So It's great to see the appreciation of that security change and why we think it is the right thing for businesses. Windows 11 and that requirement is now actually quite old when we think about when Windows 11 was first introduced, and the average refresh cycle in most countries is still 3 to 5 years, which means older devices that didn't meet that requirement generally are at the point they're starting to age out anyway. Being aware of that e-waste side and trying to make sure we help manage that. Many countries have got some great initiatives. It's different for each country, so it's hard for me to talk through specifically what they do, but programs to help manage that and make sure that anything that does go into that work stream can be reused or recycled to some extent, to try and make sure that we're being very respectful of the things in there and making sure that we're helping manage that. We know that not everybody is going to be able to move, and that's also why we have our ESU, so that devices can continue to be used while they still have a usable life in them. I know a lot of the customers that I talk to, Windows 10 devices, the specification that they bought at that time, the general, not just from the security chipset, but actually just what we used to consider, what did I need for RAM? How fast is my device? How well is it going to work? There comes a point with the evolution of other things that we've done, the tools that we're using for remote working and hybrid working, that not only are those devices at that standard refresh cycle, but actually from a productivity stance, being able to use them well, having to keep them constantly plugged in, then those new devices are driving better productivity for our users and giving us like sort of better ways of working anyway. So it's a very challenging space, but I do think making sure that we're keeping our end users secure and productive is a really important part of what we're doing, so that we can, run our businesses successfully.
Thanks for that, Bev. All around very complete answer. So appreciate that.
There was one point we didn't touch on, actually. So there was a very salient point at the end about Copilot plus PCs. And actually, that is at Ignite recently a question that we heard from a few people, that sort of fear of hardware flaw. Copilot plus PC, we very much see as a new category of device. We are hopeful that lots of people will want to use the benefit of the features there. Sort of looking at people's responses to the demonstrations of those devices at Ignite was fantastic, when you could see things like the improved window search and just being able to, if you don't know the words that you're looking for to find the thing that you need, which is me often, having a search function that is now able to interpret me asking about something in a non-PC language way, whether it's about how to connect a peripheral or whether it's, looking for information on my device. Those things are making big changes in the way that we can work. Having the MPU chipset being able to offload workloads where we have people doing specific functions, using AI in a big way, heavy Teams use, and being able to minimize the way that that affects energy on the device. It's an option, but it's not for every user type. We know that our customers have some very simple sort of information worker profiles, and some customers have very complex use of devices, which means that they need something that can work in a more efficient and effective way and run multiple programs and multiple things at the same time. It is more about making sure that there is a device type that matches all of those profiles and settings. So there's no expectation in any short-term window at all for there to be a big change there. We are not replacing every device type with a Copilot plus device as standard. We are hoping that many of you will want to adopt those devices for the great features that they have, but it is like a net new add to the ecosystem, not an instead of.
You brought up a little bit about Ignite, and even the couple of things that you shared there have got me interested in going back and watching some of the sessions. And a reminder for our audience, many of the sessions from Ignite are available as recorded sessions that you can go back and take a look. So I'd encourage you to find those areas at Ignite that you might not have had the opportunity to see or participate in during Ignite, and go catch up on those, especially since we're coming up on a little bit of extra time around the holidays when people have to get caught up, although I'm not encouraging you to do work over your holiday break. All right. Question on tech community. Will Windows Auto Patch be roadmapped for Microsoft 365 GCC cloud instances, please? There are thousands of state and local government customers in the US with limited support personnel, such as law enforcement, justice entities like superior courts and district attorney offices, fire departments and authorities, city financial and employee retirement departments, etc., that would really appreciate the availability of Windows Auto Patch.
All right, I can start and take this one. We'll let Bev comment if she wants to on it. So our goal is, this is a request we've heard quite a bit. Our goal is we want to bring Windows Auto Patch to as many people as possible. We believe it's a great technology to help you patching. Do I have any dates on a roadmap at this point? Right now we don't, but it's definitely something that we're aware of and that we'd love to do.
All right. Any thoughts, Bev, that you wanted to add? Or
I think, John's used to me and some of my team coming and asking the same question, I think is all I can really add. So making sure that we know that we have all of the right things in place to make it viable is really important. And knowing, we spend time talking with large customers. So we have some very large government bodies that we're talking to at the moment to make sure that we do fully understand the requirements, while obviously GCCI has some standard sets of requirements that are needed. Actually looking at it through the lens of the service that we're delivering and making sure that we're not missing anything else, like making sure we meet everything that GCCI needs. And we're thinking about, okay, and this is how you use Auto Patch. This is the way it delivers. This is the way you monitor it. Just checking for those customer profile types if there's anything else that would be needed or would be a specific gap in making sure that they have all of the information that they need and the controls that they need. And it's always great to have the product team deeply engaged with them, which they are. So the person asking, we are aware it is a popular ask. We are working with some of your wider community to make sure that we're understanding all of the needs, and hopefully it's something that we might have a better line of sight to sometime soon.
Yeah, and just to kind of reemphasize, one of the biggest things that we want to make sure is we live up to our product promises. So getting into GCC with like partial or limited availability, if you don't have the magic that's Auto Patch, you want to make sure that you actually have the experience that's we're offering to you. So like as Bev said, we're really want to make sure that we understand that the requirements, they're properly met. We're dealing with all the right compliance levels that we need to, and really making sure that the Auto Patch product promise is available when we say, hey, we're available in a GCC environment.
Excellent. Thanks both. All right. Next question, again from Tech Community. Are there any plans to allow Windows Hello to run on the device itself without connecting to Azure or Microsoft? This would be a huge security boost and would eliminate the need for third-party solutions.
I don't actually know the answer to that. I'm not sure if might be one of the ones the three of us might not know.
I'm wondering if our colleagues online might be able to help with that. I know we have a few friends in the background.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe we'll see if we can get some support from the other folks that are helping out with chat. All right, moving on to X platform question. How do I balance adopting new features against security and providing a consistent UX?
I'm going to take that silence as expecting you to answer.
No,
I feel like I'm going to see you looking at me.
You can all give thoughts.
Everybody's processing that.
I mean, I can start. We can all kind of pile on. I think it's a complex question because, one of the things is as you're adopting new features, you might actually be adopting new security features. Mm-hmm. You really just have to understand what the requirements of your enterprise is, and then figure out the change that you want to roll out. I'd probably say personally, I've worked at various enterprises aside from Microsoft. I've worked with a lot of customers since I've been at Microsoft. There's no one kind of right answer here or perfect playbook, but it really is just trying to understand the needs of your business, the needs of your security team, and what your business does, and then the needs of your end users of how you want to balance any kind of change to your users.
Yeah, and I can just add on, we understand for commercial customers, security is the number one priority. So, those B releases that you take are the top priorities. And then we have optional releases, which have a bunch of innovative new features that, some commercial customers are hesitant to try out. But we have a lot of things in the backlog to kind of provide you confidence that, those new features, will not affect you as much as you think. And so it's great feedback. And we recommend that, taking those optional updates and just kind of be innovative, the features that we're providing.
I think also we release many features to commercial customers, depending on the management tools and the update process that you're using. Many features are released without being activated to begin with and will become activated at the next feature release. So you have the components on the device and you have the ability to choose to adopt some of them sooner. One of the things that works really well in terms of balancing the UX experience and feature adoption is to have a trusted set of community or change champions within your organization who are interested in trying things sooner and working with them. It's something we see work really well for organizations. I know some really large organizations that use us as regular way in order to do some of the sort of early feature checking and just making sure that they can capture any end user advice that they need in terms of UX changes, important things like giving their IT support team information that they can have on hand if they think it's going to generate any questions or concerns in areas so that they're fully represented as well. I hope that most of the features that we're releasing, we've taken a lot of consideration into that security element as we go. But those quality updates as they come out, making you secure, making sure the security patches are the primary focus of that. The other loads that they have there where there may be feature updates there, generally there's an option not to adopt them straight away so that you can get used to them and you can get some of your users to test. So I'd say make sure that you're familiar with those settings in terms of what's active straight away and the things that you can hold back. Have a great set of change champions who can help you talk to your end users and champion adoption and help understand if they think there are going to be any challenges. But the fact that updates are smaller and more frequent helps with this all round as well.
And leverage the Windows preview program. We have gradual rollout options. We have, auto patch rings, kind of, gradually roll them out, see if anything goes wrong, and then broadly roll them out. So that's also a strategy that we recommend customers.
I do really like the idea of change champions. I know that, most organizations have some early adopters, and it kind of actually is a good prompt for the next question that we've got from tech community. Do sysadmins really roll out those non-security preview updates? And if so, who do they go to?
I think we somehow answered that question. So the answer is yeah, absolutely. Folks roll it out. And I think going back to Bev's comment, the change champions is the way to do that. Roll out to a trusted set of groups. You might not want to, you might decide not to deploy to everyone, but definitely you can deploy to an early set of folks, understand the impact and the change. And then you can also, even to those group of folks, leverage things like gradual rollout or ring-based deployment to also even minimize more of disruption along the way.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks, John. So the next point of feedback is a comment from tech community. I'm not anti-cloud, but users should have a choice. Every forced push to cloud or AI, rather than simply giving customers what they ask for, is another reason to choose another platform. Public cloud uptime continues to not be any better than the old private server room or data center days. Great piece of feedback. I don't know if any of you have some thoughts that you want to share on that, but that's certainly a good piece to take back to the different product groups as well.
I would love to know if this user has some specific examples recently where they feel that we have made a bad decision or haven't supported their needs there, because I think understanding what the alternative expectation is and what the alternative preferences are help us a lot as we look at the options. I think, John, you might have some thoughts on this as well, but one of the biggest things I've seen in terms of customers that have transitioned more to be cloud native in terms of management as well as data management is actually when it comes to security and recovery options for anything that they're managing. Generally, it's easier for them to manage those things, and more specifically with many places having much more mobile workforces as well. I know several. Most of the calls today, I think we're unusual that we have a lot of people in the office on this call. The other calls that we've been hosting, a lot of us have been in our home offices. And we see that a lot with a lot of our customers as well, that the workforce is more disparate and diverse and maybe not geographically located as centrally as they used to be. So for a lot of our customers, actually, cloud management and cloud tooling makes it much easier to meet those end user needs, to be able to make sure that they can drive security changes and updates and be protected faster, easier, because they're not reliant on that internal infrastructure to be able to achieve those things. Things like being able to deploy devices even. So, autopilot from Intune is another cloud service, being able to help people to deploy things to people where you can ship a device and you can get up and working. There are many different versions of cloud services, so it would be great to understand, which aspects here are causing some frustration. But increasingly, we're seeing it gives that agility and security that customers require. And so it is a large part of Microsoft's strategic vision that we do believe it's the right path to follow, and that we see customers that are adopting that being able to adopt other changes and benefits more quickly. But we are feedback driven. So understanding which services and what challenges will help us significantly to understand if we've maybe missed something that we're not thinking of.
Yeah, and just to kind of comment, I think Bev did an amazing summary there. One of the things I always kind of look back on myself is when I think about like hybrid workforce and everything. Like, if I look at my engineering team, we used to be in the office pretty much all the time, but then now we're a mix of hybrid. But when you actually look at the bigger scope of years ago, even like people would be remote infrequently, having the ability to easily work, easily manage those devices, whether it's a sales rep going out on a customer call or somebody that that just happens to have to be home for the day. It's not the standard. It does make these things easier. So when I think hybrid, I do think of like, hey, I never walk into the office, but then I also reflect on it's various other areas, like I said, like Salesforce, the occasional remote type of thing. And I think the cloud services really help there. But really, I'd love to understand more too of which cloud services in particular, whether it's, and I don't want to call anything out, but like things are Intune, things like M365 apps, I think people think of those differently, or, how they interact versus what would have been an on-premise server.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. Yeah, so maybe we'll get a follow-up from that community member. All right, another question from tech community. How does Microsoft suggest we patch Windows clients and servers with no internet access behind firewalls or in process control networks? We currently rely on Windows Software Update Services, or WSUS, to get the updates and then distribute via tight firewall policies to computers in a PCN. Good question on some best practice for network connectivity challenges. Anybody have thoughts? Kind of feeling like a no.
Gap scenario.
Each frame for the person. I think I want to be honest. I don't think anyone in engineering would be uncomfortable saying, it's something we continue to look at to find the best solution. Intune and Windows are working very closely together to understand how to help address these device types, and whether it's through internal delivery of, how the best internal delivery mechanism works once you have the update within your network to then be able to get it to the other devices. There are ways to do it. Like code is available and advice has been published on how you are able to do that, but we know not everybody has coding teams waiting to sit and make those changes available there. We also like to continue to work with customers to understand what the different air gap scenarios are. Between those that we understand truly must be, like, well, I'm not trying to suggest for a moment there are devices that there aren't good reason that they're air gapped, but there are sometimes for some customers where they've become that way over time, not because they need to be, but just because they haven't yet got used to using other tools and systems to help keep them up to date, to understand how to minimize changes that are happening, to look at the ways that they can control access and usage, and whether it's air gapped or whether it's just not connected all of the time, and how we can help customers with those scenarios too. I don't know, John or Dave, and the work that you're doing, I know that we spend a lot of time talking about how we can try and help evolve this space, whether it's devices that are, literally can't connect because they're not near a connection, they're, underwater in a remote desert, wherever they might be. There's lots of scenarios, and also clearly there are many critical services run by IT that we all fully understand we would not want to have in a connected scenario at all times.
Yeah, again, great summary, Bev. For us, I think one of the things we're always looking at, what is not connected to the internet really mean in today's world? And like you said, there's there's some things that literally can never connect, but in a lot of cases there are, pass through proxies and punch throughs, and just really trying to understand, the best way, the best things that we can offer with basically the changing landscape of what used to be air gap of truly not connected or plugged into any kind of network connection to really, kind of, isolated, but still has a limited access through various means. So it's something we're very interested in and we're looking to learn more about. So any more detail you can kind of help us provide, that'd be really useful as we kind of build out new products and services in this space.
I think it's also worth commenting, John, that obviously we know a lot of our customers continue to use SCCM or Configuration Manager for those scenarios as well, where they need that tighter control and keeping those services there. Back to our earlier question about cloud management and cloud services, we are still looking for smarter ways so that devices in these situations, there's still the fastest path to security patching when people need to be able to make change, or just being able to ensure that those devices are monitored for other things in the same way as other devices on the network. But those air gap scenarios, then there are tools today. We have had a lot of feedback about WSUS, and again, the people in the chat with questions in those spaces. The feedback is welcomed as we continue to look at how to innovate in that space. But that is the reason that there are tools that continue to focus on managing for those scenarios. And I know a lot of customers have a lot of success using Configuration Manager there.
Yeah, although we have lots of discussion about cloud native, still lots of customers that are out there using Configuration Manager, and especially for those environments that are sitting behind firewalls or are isolated shop control systems, that really have no need to connect to the internet for their solutions and so forth. So yeah, good point. All right, to change a little bit from the technology discussion, we've got an interesting question from one of our listeners on X, and let's do a round robin with each of you. And this person is curious: how do you define agility? Obviously, it's in the context of our cloud services here and Windows, not necessarily on agility and going to the a confidence course or outrunning, trying to avoid obstacles while you're getting some exercise. So we'll start with you. We'll start with you, Akash. How would you define agility?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think agility is our team's ability to quickly respond to the changing requirements in today's world. We have a lot of security requirements coming, which is a top priority for us, and requirements are continuously changing, and so that kind of requires our team to kind of listen to feedback and iterate on that. So, which is why a team out here has a backlog of ever-going changes and features that we know you want, and we're continuously going through that backlog to see what we can reprioritize, what we can't, based on the landscape we have today in this world, user feedback, what we think aligns with Microsoft strategy. And so I think it's really the ability to kind of react, listen to feedback, and iterate with everything going on. That's a general statement, but I think from our product perspective, that's how I think about it.
Excellent. Bev, what about you? What are your thoughts on
I actually love your exercise and obstacle analogy, because I think that works perfectly well when we think about, as our customers adopting technology and the customers that we see doing it with the greatest ease. You could use that analogy very easily. It's almost that change of going from, I was talking to a customer the other day about the fact that one of the things I loved when I moved out here to Washington State was that near our campus, most of the traffic lights have those in-road detections, so that if there's no traffic coming from another obstacle, the traffic light will be green and I can keep driving. Where I lived previously in rural England, that was not the case. And you always feel silly when you're sat at a red traffic light and there's nothing else around. But that always used to be our IT approach to change, right? Everything sits at a red light until we've validated everything and somebody gives us a green light to go. And actually, most things are well tested before they ever get out into our wider ecosystem, whether it's through the internal testing that we're doing here, all of our great customers that spend time on our insiders builds and doing the early checks there, and even the way that we then release out and then encourage customers to use things like ring deployment as well to make sure that there's a gradual adoption of new things. It encourages us to think about change in that same way. And so it gives us that agility that we'll let it go out just a little bit. And if we see a signal that tells us there's traffic coming from another direction, we have the ability to stop. We can make sure that we control that and we don't go any further than we need to. We can avoid those obstacles and difficulty. But if there's nothing coming and there's no signal that tells us there's a challenge, and things continue to work, then we can continue to let it flow, and we can spend our time thinking about bigger, more complex projects and dealing with more challenging things. So I think as I think about agility, it's using those things and those tools and systems, like having well-defined groups and good ring deployment to enable us to be able to trust more things to flow and spend more of our time thinking about big, complex problems and not just assuming that everything's going to fail and everything needs to be tested to the nth degree. Really good users and trusted users finding things fast early on in a deployment journey, enabling us to focus on the things that need to be fixed rather than wasting time testing things that actually work 99.9% of the time, is like that gives us the agility to be able to keep moving forward and adopt new features and focus on like the bigger, harder problems and help our business stay current and take on the new tooling and the new things that we want to do.
I like that. John?
Oh, see, this is
on agility.
the bad part about going last is that it's kind of already spoken to, but I'll just kind of recap what I think are highlights in my mind. So I think of agility kind of on two sides. I look at it from how we approach engineering and respond to customer requests. And I look at things like when we did the unification of AutoPatch and WolfBee deployment services to just be AutoPatch. That was response to, we released AutoPatch. It was quickly growing. And there was customer confusion, and they're like, hey, this doesn't make a lot of sense. So, we took our existing backlog, kind of paused some things that weren't super critical, but still important, pivoted, and then tried to adjust to customer needs. And then I look at agility from, the customer side of things, where it's getting out there and not, spending these very long 2-year processes to do everything, but really understanding things through like leveraging change champions, doing ring-based deployments, and looking at how they can easily or quickly more roll out technology, but also do it in a way that they have a good risk management profile on it. And again, that's a lot of things through early seeding of bits, whether you have change champions that do insider or even they're just the first ring of your test group. So that's kind of the way I kind of think about it.
Great perspective. Thanks everyone for your perspectives on that. I think it's a great topic, and in IT, agility is part of everyday jobs. So great to have your perspectives on those. All right, next question. I feel like we're always behind and running just to catch up. I think that's probably the way a lot of us feel in our day-to-day jobs. You're not alone on that, our audience member. Part of it is our legacy processes, but if we invest the time to change, how do we future-proof our strategies? Thinking a year or two down the line. Interesting question. Anyone got some thoughts? How do we future-proof our strategies?
I think some of this comes back to the discussion we've just been having for me in terms of that agility. I think process change is sometimes harder than technology change, right? Like trying to encourage a group of people to agree to do something differently and to look at something in a new way. But we've seen the industry manage that well in other areas. And so it would be good to know if there are specific areas when this person talks about legacy processes where they feel caught up with the customers that we spend a lot of time talking to. Some of the most common areas that we'll see will be still wanting to hold on to kind of fortress defense rather than an assumed breach model, can often hold customers back in terms of how they think about adopting technology or how they think about users using technology. So getting into a space that you're thinking about an assumed breach model, you're assuming that you're being identity driven, so that you're really thinking about how to protect credentials and how to make sure that you're using access appropriately for new tools and new services in those spaces. And the very thing we've been talking about in terms of change control and making sure that you are using those phased deployments and that kind of safe deployment path through using predefined business groups and ring deployments, so that you're able to use that find fast, fix fast methodology they help with that pace of change. But I think it's difficult to say much more without understanding which kind of process areas are causing the biggest challenge. But there is sadly always going to be an element of feeling like we're trying to catch up. Hopefully we can get to a point that we feel that we're walking at a quick pace rather than running to catch up. But really key is just defining what is that core set of principles that you and your business are going to work to in terms of how you're managing IT, making sure that you have alignment between your security, identity, and kind of admin users, that these are the right things, and helping getting those core principles put in place. Then everything else that you're adopting should be easier once you've agreed how to think about identity and access, what your core security principles are. And then you can use those to help govern the other changes.
You know, one of the things that you said there, Bev, was assume breach, and reminded me that just the general principle of zero trust and you know, using those principles are a great way to ensure that you've got a strategy that is future-proofing your IT. So I know that Microsoft has a lot of resources on zero trust deployments, and so that may be another thing for our audience members to take a look at. So thanks for the reminder about that. All right, next question. So if we're going to roll out a new Windows thing, how do we measure if it were beneficial or not? When we opt into new AI capabilities or services like AutoPatch, will we be able to turn it back if we don't like it, either from an IT or a user perspective? A couple of interesting questions in there. Anyone have thoughts?
I can kind of hop in on part of it, and I'll let other people go in. So just measuring like things like AutoPatch from a service perspective, you know, one of the key things to measure is just your time to compliance and the amount of time and resourcing you're spending on patching. You know, one thing we hear from customers a lot is it reduces the need for the IT pro to spend a lot of time with patching. You're getting better insights, you're understanding more of what's going on in your environment. So from that aspect, just measuring your staffing time or your resource time, or more importantly, how quickly your devices are getting patched or how efficiently they're getting patched. So that's something when I look at, you know, whether it's patch or, you know, even anything else in Intune from a service perspective, how much it's reducing your workload and how much quicker it's getting your environment compliant is what I look at.
Yeah, I was gonna back into that. Depends on your goals, right? With any feature that you adopt, like for AI and Copilot and stuff like that, it's like an assistant that can kind of help you be more productive, save time, help you manage your updates. And so if that's your goal and the feature's helping you out with that, you should measure it that way. AutoPatch, you know, our goal is to keep you compliant and let us do the work for you. And so if it's helping your IT admins save time and get productive faster, then I think it's a win.
I think on the sort of admin and patching side, fully aligned with the things you're saying, understanding what was your baseline before, how do you measure success of patching? Is it speed by which something is patched? Is it percentage left at the end of the month in terms of, you know, there's often some challenging use cases, whether it's devices being online or not, or other challenges. If you've got that comparison, that makes a lot of sense. I think from things like AI usage, user voice is always one of the best things. Between change champions and end users, help desk calls are all natural places for us to look at whether there's been a change in volume or sentiment towards those things. I think also there's some great tools out there that are starting to be built that feedback. So if there are specific things that you can tell us about how you tend to measure, is it use? And use isn't always the best statistic because somebody can click something on and not enjoy using it. What we hope is that somebody's going to take a new tool, use it, and get benefit from it. So we're putting a lot of investment into looking at how do you measure things like productivity and how can we help represent that back to our customers. Tools like Purview already have some of those aspects in there, and I know it's something that we continue to invest in. One of the challenges for us as Microsoft is what we see as a good measurement of productivity doesn't necessarily always match what our end users feel is the same. I think I've heard a lot of feedback on AI in terms of how do you measure the ROI. You know, I love it when I ask for a summary of a meeting that I couldn't attend all of, and I get these great bullet points at the end of it that tells me, how do you persuade somebody? What time did that save? Or I think about when I've been on vacation and I come back and I'm like trying to summarize, what have I missed in my inbox? How do I prioritize that? I was originally an AI skeptic, I have to say, for some of those things as to how is it really going to change what I was doing. I don't realize how much I depend on it now for it to help me summarize those things and focus my time and literally save hours over the course of a week of not having to go and try to find that information and piece it together, just being able to get something that pulls the right information for me or gives me the summary that I need. And then all I'm doing is a small rewrite. I know that I've had significant time gains back as an individual. So for us as Microsoft, looking at how can we help measure some of those things and present that back to businesses in a way that is useful and helpful, not just for them to see kind of benefit, but just also adoption rate, so that the things that we're doing in terms of driving change, we can see how quickly we're helping users get those benefits as well, because obviously that's the aim. But to those who are listening, or to the person specifically that asked the question, if you have some notes on the things that you see specifically as how you measure that meaningful impact, that would be great, because maybe we can tell you what's already there, or maybe you can help us think about the next phase of investments that we need to put to improve that reporting as well.
Thanks, Bev. One of the things that you mentioned was AI and how Copilot helps. And coming up on our next Tech Community Live is going to be all about AI capabilities in Windows and Copilot plus PCs. And I know that oftentimes in these Tech Community Lives, we have people who go from one session to the next session, and they join all 4 of our Tech Community Live sessions. So with that in mind, we've come to the end of our time here in this particular session. We want to give folks just a little bit of a break before the final session of our Tech Community Live. So I want to take the time to thank Akash, John, and Bev for spending some time with us today to share their thoughts and feedback. And any last words that you want to share before we go?
I can start. Thanks for all the feedback, questions, and such. And personally, I'm also interested in just learning more about folks that are using AutoPatch and their feedback and experiences on it. So, any additional, asks, questions, feedback requests, feature requests, love to hear more. Love to hear how we can just make your patch experience super easy, super lightweight, and super useful for you.
Yeah, we're always open to feedback. Like I said, we, as a PM team, we look at all the features and user feedback that is coming in, and we reprioritize every couple months to make sure that we're targeting the right user problems. So any feedback you have on controls, management, reporting, anything, please, feel free to reach out or comment that community.
A big thank you to the community that has raised questions today, and please keep using resources like office hours to stay connected. It helps us immensely, and PMs love it when we know we've made a change that's something that's really driven by the user community. So keep asking the questions and keep letting us know what we can do differently.
All right, thanks everyone for your feedback. Take a few moments, grab some water, coffee, or snack, and join us for the final AMA. Thanks again to our audience and for all the feedback, and thanks to our panel for providing some great insights into all the different areas that our customers are interested in. That's all for now. See you at the next Tech Community Live.